Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is only hours away from kicking off his New Year's resolution to stream more.
What a jerk. Tim Longo. Oh, yeah, I have it on my list. It's on my list.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's top on your list.
Yeah. There are some things brewing in the Discord, which, only the Discord people know. But, so I'm sure we'll plug that when it happens, but some charity stuff happening.
Yeah.
So I am going to participate in that for sure, but. That's the only thing I can guarantee.
I went and saw today that I was reached out to as well, but I don't know when it's going to be or whether I'll be available. So we will see. But
I think it's the 28th. I think is what Artimage said. It's the 28th of January.
Okay, well that's a day that I'm typically pretty busy because we have D&D, but we might be done by then. So we'll see. Anyway, we're doing this kind of in the beginning of the new year rather at the end of the old year, but we like every year to sort of recap our takeaways for the year, which usually we draw from our interviews. We actually had fewer interviews last year than we've had in prior years, which is strange because we actually played more games made by companies that are more accessible to us, which is to say non-Japanese or non-Asian companies. But for whatever reason, a lot of the games are much older, and so those people are kind of out. They're not easily accessible, or whatever. Also, we're busy. So,
it wasn't. It wasn't for lack of. It wasn't for lack of trying necessarily, but it's getting guests. It takes surprisingly a lot more work than you realize sometimes, and then I realize.
Yeah.
I had multiple threads going on pretty much every game that we played this year, but sometimes they come to fruition and sometimes they don't. In fact, one of the threads is actually still in progress, so we might actually just get a late bonus episode for one of the games, but no guarantees. I won't even mention which one. But to Brett's point, 2023 was a busy, rough year, to be honest. And I'm sure you don't want to hear this from us, but unfortunately the podcast often does not take first priority. So the first thing that falls off my plate sometimes is other than just doing what we need to do to get the next episode out, which is usually just playing the game and taking notes. But anything other than that often, So apologize we didn't get more, but I did want to say up top, after re-listening to the three we did get, one thing I am proud is none of them are designers.
That's true. Yeah.
And I'm really, even though we only got the three, and as we've talked about recently on the episode, I do regret that we don't get more women on the podcast. So they all are all men, but all of them are in disciplines that we typically don't talk to.
Yeah.
And so we got good variety from that perspective, from a discipline perspective. In fact, one of the disciplines we've never talked to somebody in that discipline. So
there were also a million gems. I also listened back to them, today, and just was like, every time I heard something that was like, oh, I might cite that, I would just jot the time down and kind of make a quick note. I have more than half a dozen for each of them. So that I could draw from, where I'm just like, these were all, and some were like, well, I'm not going to pull out that as an anecdote because it's very specific and not really applicable as a takeaway, but it's still cool. And some of those I just ignored and didn't even note. But in general, it was like, wow, there's a lot of good stuff. There's gold in them there hills, as they say. So,
yeah, agreed. They all really insightful, and they all are really good interviews. So, I'm sure a lot of our listeners focus on the interviews, and probably most people listening have already listened to them. But if you haven't, I definitely recommend. They're not too long, so going back to do all three of them, you can do pretty easily.
Yeah, I did all three today. So they're also easy to listen to while you're doing something with your hands. So like if you're planning on cooking an elaborate meal, that's a great time to listen to a podcast of those lengths because you kind of chopping and stuff or whatever. And I was doing some illustration today, and it was just great to have it on and just have the pen and pad next to me, so I could just move my hand over and make a note. Whenever I heard something I thought I might want to reflect back on. But let's do that. Let's start reflecting back on them. I guess I should say who our guests were first, or maybe we'll just do it kind of organically as we talk about each of them. So why don't you just go ahead and go first, and we can recap who your anecdote or takeaway is from.
Yeah, so I listened to them in reverse order, but I'll start in chronological order. So Grant Kirkhope,
yes,
who was one of the composers on GoldenEye 007 for the N64. So that was a really lucky one we got through a friend, Neil Harrison, who used to work at Rare as well. And it was just delightful to talk to him. And he is a delightful person. And we got to talk a lot about old school Rare and stuff. And like you, same as you, I have, definitely over half a dozen here. But if I were to pick one, there's a section specifically where we are talking about is it John Barry? Is that the composer? Yeah, the yeah. Okay, great. I was hoping you would do that. Anyway, I brought up the Statue Park level, and in the interview, and asked him about his process there. He had a great quote earlier where he felt like he was very much the shut your eyes and tell a story kind of composer, which was a great quote. You don't have to clip that one, but it led into a bit of a discussion about Statue Park level and the mood and tone that his composition brought to it. And as we were talking about that, he talked about how he was trying to basically channel John Barry and think about ways to have it spiritually rather feel like it would have fit into something that John Barry would have done with horns and different types of instruments and stuff. So that was cool because we talked. I like that section because we talked so much about how music drives the emotion of a experience in a game.
Yeah, I was trying to find, because John Barry wrote the music for a lot of the Bond movies in the early days, I mean, Monty Norman is credited with the theme tune, but, that was a very litigious issue between Barry and Monty Norman. Monty Norman did write the that was his right. But when it goes to the that's complete John Barry. You can tell it's John Barry big band, right? But Monty Norman would never give it to me. He said, that's all mine, that's the way it went. But, I mean, I was just trying to find those John Barry, because they've always got these crunchy, chords that you'd have in Bond movies that were just for that big vista that you'd look at. There's always a classic point in every movie where you get this kind of juicy chords over a big vista of some kind of beautiful Italian, whatever it is, like that. And I was just trying to find some chords that I could just, bung my hands on the keyboard and try and find something that wasn't like normal. That would, try to be, not saying I did it, but try to get some of that John Barry magic in there, because I feel like that area really needed it. I was so happy when I kind of found those intro chords on the French horns, my little sample, I thought the atmosphere was, I was so pleased with myself. I thought I really found the right atmosphere for that level. And it's got that grandiose melody after the chords happen. And, that would have been great if I had a live orchestra. It would have been awesome, it would have been great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it though, because I remember too, he talked a lot about, his kind of approach and his emotional approach and how he kind of goes for the feeling. It led to a lot of discussion about like how that cuts through to something essential, right? About the human experience, right? That it kind of cuts through our intellect to our our lizard brain or whatever. So I remember that for sure. I think I'm gonna do Grant last for mine. So I'll start with Jack Mathews, who was technical director or lead engineer or something along those lines for Metroid Prime, which we played back in May, June kind of time frame when it came out. Was re-released for the Switch. We played the remastered edition because I could not. I don't have the GameCube version. I have the Metroid Prime 2. and I think I have the trilogy for the Wii again. Now I think I picked that up for my folks. In any case, one thing that I really, really appreciated about him was we talked a lot about staying at 60 hertz. And that to me is very impressive. I mean, it's really hard to do. There's really only one way to do it, which he confirmed. I was like, the only way I can think to do it would be, and he said, yep, can confirm. That's the way you do it, which is you start at 60 and then you never let the team go below. And there was a lot to do with that. But my favorite part of that was the visors and how he talked about, first he kind of talked about avoiding like the worst stuff that the GameCube, is really bad at, just don't do the things that the machine is bad at, which is really important. Like knowing your hardware is really important as an engineer, especially for graphics, other performance critical areas. But in particular, he talked about the visors and how whenever he added something to the visors, he made sure he removed something at the same time. And that was really great because it really lent each of those their own feel and became a gameplay thing. So here's that clip.
And then we just sort of beat it into everybody that this was what the minimum was going to be, and your work wasn't done, and QA would fail you if you weren't keeping within the limits that we set. And so, like, if environment kept within their limits and then things were, like, going too much on gameplay-wise, then it became either remove some enemies, scale down on particles, or make some kind of deal with environment to make the environment handle this. So that's kind of where we sort of started with 60. And then we have the 4 visors in the game. And what I did with that is pretty much as I was designing the other visors, I very intentionally made it so that any new feature added to a visor removed something else. Like, for instance, in the thermal visor, it does not do world lighting underneath. So we turn off light maps. So I get an extra texture pass because I remove a texture pass.
I see. I figured you were going to say something like that because the visors would allow you to make big choices like that. Yeah,
or like the scan visor, we put the gun down whenever you engage the visor. So suddenly you're no longer rendering any particles or any gunfire. So we don't have to worry about that entering the scene. X-ray visor.
Such good trade-offs.
Yeah, X-ray visor was a similar one. And also X-ray visor has this it has hardware fog that comes in really far. So we can actually bring the far clip plane really far in on the X-ray visor as well. Stuff like that. So and I just was really diligent about basically going through areas in the game, switching between the visors, looking at the GPU meter and making sure that assumption held.
So for my second one, I will go with Jack Mathews as well. And I think anyone who's listened to the full interview already probably can guess at this one because I had a moment in the interview that I just loved, and it kind of reminded me of certain, philosophies or, opinions about how things should be done. And from a development standpoint, as a designer, I should say, and from a development standpoint, Brett and I talk about this a lot just in our daily lives and have very similar viewpoints on this. But Jack was really able to. It kind of emerged as a topic about how what I'm going to call it the Lincoln Logs section because he kept saying Lincoln Logs.
Yeah.
And that was his version of kind of a modular approach to giving designers especially these component. I'm generalizing, but these component pieces of things, and then they can kind of put the pieces together, but it doesn't give them full power and autonomy to do whatever they want with, say, a full scripting language or something like that. So it forces these constraints on designers. But the reason we got onto this topic, one of the reasons was because we were talking about how polished the game is and how consistent the game is, which both of those things are very hard to do in any game. And he was kind of talking about the development approach that led them to that, especially with the tools that they gave the designers. And he just did a great job at summarizing, I think, why for me that is such an important thing to do in development and why it works so well. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that section.
Yeah, like at Nintendo, even, like, it was crazy because I think we were looking at one of the Zelda games or something. They wanted to see how our tools worked, and they were showing us some of theirs, and it was nuts because, like, their designers were doing. I mean, they call most of their designers just planners. They don't even call them like game designers. Mm-hmm. And they were pretty much just editing CSV files. They were editing Excel spreadsheets, and that's how they were modifying data in the game. Like, they didn't have tools, they didn't have, but that limit meant that they knew where the boundaries were, you know, because I mean, this is something I've said for a while, and it's not the most delicate thing, but I think, like, a lot of the times here in the West, the role of a game designer is either a bad engineer or a bad artist. You know, like, we sort of throw them at the other disciplines of scripting or kit bashing art together into levels in a way that doesn't necessarily serve the end product very well. And so one thing that, you know, we definitely did, like, a lot of scripting by way of the sort of Lincoln logging together at Retro, but in another way, everyone kind of, like, knew where they fit in the team and knew what they were meant to do. The game designers were there to architect the worlds, meaning they, like, built out, you know, all of the, what we call blue rooms, what everyone calls gray boxes now. You know, they built all that out for the motion and for the feel and making sure that, like, basically they could get good gameplay in a room. And then they Lincoln logged all that gameplay together, and artists built all the art to make it look beautiful around it. And everyone, and game designers were not, like, building AIs, and they weren't, like, building state machines, and they weren't putting all these things together that were essentially logic puzzles that would end up biting us at the end. And so I think that might have helped in focusing everybody to being able to do a really good polish stage at the end.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll make the clip. I don't know if it has made the clip that you've just heard. But I remember him ending that section by saying, you know, we ask designers these days to either be a bad engineer or a bad artist, you know, where that's not really, neither one of those things obviously is their strength, their individual strength. It's not what they necessarily bring to a project. And so, you know, I really appreciated that as well, of just saying, you know, we don't have to do this. You know, we don't have to put them in this position where they don't feel like they can, you know, really hit it out of the park. And that was, you know, sort of his reflection on that, which I thought was really cool. As well. There was a lot of gems and jacks as well. I have I think I have honorable mentions for all of them. Some good, some bad, some were very funny. So we'll maybe come back to them. I think I'll go to Karl Stewart next, which was a joy to listen to again. That was our most recent interview. I guess it would have been in November, maybe. And there were a lot of gems in there. We had never talked to a marketing person before, and certainly not someone of Karl's stature. He's, and also, someone who really did the whole embed with the team thing, which was really great. I mean, a lot of the stories kind of come from that. There was one late in the episode that was kind of a real insight to me. It was about a very specific thing, but it really was the sort of, I think it really encapsulated the whole idea of what marketing can and should do for your project, particularly if you have a very good project where you're hitting out of the park, which was what was happening with Arkham Asylum. And that was where he talks about going to DC and saying, we want to put the Batman name inside the logo, inside the bat symbol, which I like. It's a small thing kind of on its own, but it really, I think, encapsulates a lot of what Karl had to say about how marketing should really be carving out the identity for that product, especially with a licensed product, how that becomes its own thing, right? And really kind of plants a flag and says, we're here, we're just as important. Since we talked a lot in the series about how the Batman universe, has been impacted by the Arkham series of games, particularly in the sort of later incarnations of some of the characters. I thought that was a really prescient anecdote.
I think it took a few of us to sort of say, this is different and we have to challenge what we do. And I think when we said that enough times, the rest of the team all started to believe it. And I think when I look back, I think that was probably the one thing I love most about it, is that I was given the opportunity to sort of have a voice and shout loud and say to everybody, like, we cannot do the same thing that we've always been doing on titles. This has to be different. And, Sarah, who I sort of, reported into on a brand side, and then Trevor, we all decided that, we would put every single hour into the thought process of, a logo, for instance, right? Like I remember the team sketching the logo on the back of a napkin, and us sort of challenging Warner Brothers and saying, what if we put the word Batman inside of the bat symbol? And they were like, nope, it's never been done before. It'll never happen. And we were like, well, why not? So we sketched it out. A few of us sort of sketched it out on a piece of paper, and we sent it across to the team at Warner, Philip and the crew. And they were like, we'll submit it to DC and see what they say. And DC came back and went, you know what? We love that. I've never done it before. That's different. And there was us sort of challenging the norm, right? If we had sort of said, okay, let's just put the name Batman underneath the bat symbol, but we were challenging it to say, no, how do we even do that different? Right. And that was sort of just the way we were at that time. It was like, let's challenge everything. And working with DC, we also respected that it was their IP, and we had to make sure that we couldn't break too many rules, but it was also, how do we be different?
Yeah, that was a good moment for me as well. I had it in my notes too, that was a very encapsulating example for his approach, and not being afraid to, especially from a branding perspective, not being afraid to challenge the norms, even if you're working with somebody else's IP like that. So yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, I think, I think we talked after the show about, with Star Wars, and having made something that was a little different in Republic Commando, and especially since we weren't really around for the marketing, because LucasArts was going through its own turmoil, at that time, and the game came out, several months after we were both gone, and most of the team was gone, so there's almost nobody. I don't think there are too many people left to hear to hear somebody really fighting for the identity of the game was cool. I guess Chris was still there. Chris Williams.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Chris was probably the one. He
probably is the one person carrying that forward at the time. But
and Greg was probably still there. Greg Knight, but he was working on other stuff.
Yeah, for sure. He would have been Star Warsing it up, I'm sure. All right, let's hear your third and final.
Yeah, I mean, for Karl, for me, I think it's pretty early, maybe a third of the way through is when, because we talked about this off and on throughout the whole section, but when he first started talking about embedding with the team, and he was giving some examples from Arkham, which we kind of returned to with Tomb Raider, but of course we're not talking about that per se. But early on, he talked about his revelations about listening to the team and working with the team. It was when he had kind of gotten one of his new roles on the Eidos side and realized that there was just this sort of like rinse and repeat playbook that needed to be challenged. And the more time he spent with the team, the more that they would trust him, and trust the brand team, the marketing team, and that embedding with the team allowed, whether, and he wasn't working at Rocksteady like he did for Crystal later on, but he was going to Rocksteady a lot, right? And working with the team and, quote unquote, embedding with them and being able to, be a team member, right? And be sort of there, blur the lines there in a good way where there really isn't a difference. So when when he talks about going out to pitch the game and stuff and share the game, even internally, and being able to do that because he's a lot closer to it. And that was again, we talked about it throughout, but the start of that conversation in that first section was the kernel for the essential playbook that he would employ moving forward. So having been sort of one of the recipients of that, wisdom later on, I could definitely really appreciate it. So it was good to see. It was good to hear the genesis of it, basically, on Arkham.
I think what I found in sort of the early days, which was very, very frustrating, is that, there was an interpretation of what you were developing in a studio, and it was being translated into, that commercial view without the full input of the studio, without the full input of the creators. And that to me was very, very frustrating to sort of see that, we were having teams, and I won't call out names because it's unfair because the world has changed so much over the years in the way in which we do it. But we would have, heads of marketing could come up with a tagline and a mission statement for what the title is, and then sort of launch it and not really have any input from the studio.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's their game, right? It's their world they're developing. Why are we coming up with this? And it was almost a case of, hey, I remember at the time with Eidos, games were being developed, and timelines were being chosen because of, the market, right? It was like, this needs to be out by a certain date because it's over end of year or end of quarter. And it was very much publishing or making decisions based on a number of different things, and not always about whether or not the quality of the game. I've worked on some stinkers. I've been privy to sort of, games that have been rushed through the pipeline too quickly. And I sort of vowed never to ever work on a property like that again, and to sort of work closely with the studio and the teams. And I think when I moved over to sort of, head of marketing in North America and looking after the Arkham franchise and that brand in particular, that's really when we started to make a change. That was when, I decided I was going to park myself as often as I could with Jamie and Sefton at Rocksteady. I'm sure most people know the story of, they had been sort of co-funded from Eidos in the early days to create Urban Chaos. And I got to meet with the guys and sort of understand what sort of the process they were going through in developing the sort of sequel to that, which was Chaos Theory. And that's when, they were really getting deep into using Unreal. And, it was mind blowing. And when they were given the opportunity to be able to take the Batman franchise, I remember stepping in and sitting with Phil Rogers, who ended up becoming the CEO, and saying, like, I think we've got to do something different here. Like, I don't think we can treat this the same way as we have all other titles. And Phil, to this day is a super close friend and had been a mentor for many years. And Phil gave me the blessing to say, look, go as deep as you want to go on this. And let's have the conversation. And I won the trust of Jamie and Sefton, and, spent a lot of time with them, understanding things such as, they were building a combat system. And, I heard somebody in the room say it one day, this is so fluid. And we were like, well, it's a fluid combat system. Like, let's trademark that. Like, and we start bringing confidence to the team, because it was like, guys, you just look at what you've got. You got something magical here. And, I can tell you, there was a lot of stories we can get into around the Arkham world when that game was coming out. Because, even at the time, Eidos didn't fully understand what they had.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah.
that was one of the big things for me. It was like, I was going to the studio, I was seeing the passion, I was playing the game.
Yeah. You were really the beneficiary of that. He actually gave a separate anecdote, which was also in my notes, which, would make a good bookend with that, which is when he felt a call to revise the plan for Tomb Raider for a particular market. I think it might have been the U.S. market.
It was North America.
Yeah, it was North America. Yeah. I should say North America, not the U.S. because it's not synonymous. But yeah, I that was the same sort of thing, that he was there to because he knew the team so well, to know that this was not the intent, and that that other team who was probably doing very fine work, it just wasn't work that represented the actual product that was being made. And that's an easy disconnect to make, because of course, unless you are there playing and seeing the game, you may pick up the wrong things from whatever meetings you do have with the developers, right? And you never know what's going to kind of spark the creative spark in somebody else, especially when they only come and see your game for an hour, or whatever in the marketing department. So I really appreciated that from Karl as well, which was kind of the other side of that coin. I mean, there was one is going to bat for it in one way. Sorry for the pun. And then the other was sort of like saying, whoa, you're not in the right zone. So it was cool that he was on both sides of that. I guess I said I would come back to Grant last. So of course mine is
banana.
no. I will have dropped that in here. But no, mine actually came right at the very end of his interview, and it was such a sweet way for the interview to kind of go out, which was talking about how, you make these things that get, just because they happen to be playing them when they're, whatever, that critical age, 10, 11, 12, whatever it might be for a particular person, where something that they experience at that time sticks with them for the rest of their lives, because we were talking about that TikTok or whatever about the pause music. And it had come after the discussion about the pause music, but it was sort of like, it just happened to hit some people at the right time that they had that forever. And like how humbling that is. That sort of humility in the face of what we do is something I've really felt more and more the longer my career has gone on, because I've been more aware of it. When I got started, it was just like, wow, this is a cool thing to do. And then later on, I sort of started to get the sense of what kind of impacts we had. And this was a take on it I hadn't really considered. And so that one really stuck with me. And that's the one I'd want to go out on.
I feel like there's like a finite gap of like 8 till 14 or something like that age group where, you remember every TV show you watched, every theme tune you watched, all the lyrics like Scooby-Doo for me, and Thunderbirds and Stingray and, all those things that Captain Scarlet and,
Stingray, oh my God.
Yeah, all those things. I can remember the theme tune till the day I die. And I feel like those little bits of that kind of finite age range, you never forget those things till the day you die. You just never do. And I just feel you've got to wait 20 years for people to remember it, for me, especially.
That's what you did.
Yeah, no, but I feel like it is a real. I think all us human beings remember those vivid memories, forever. It's imprinted in your head. So if any of us, any of the games we've made or worked on, whatever, get to be in that little kind of age group, it's a massively humbling thing to think that anybody will remember something you did all those years ago and forever until they pass away. I think it's just. What an unbelievable thing that we get to do something like that can imprint on someone's mind forever, it's just crazy.
But also, okay, because we got both of those.
Yeah. And of course, I very rarely listen to the episodes after, until we have to do this episode. So I had forgotten that I should have gone back to listen to your down pitching of his Donkey Kong in the actual episode. So I was obviously laughing out loud when I was listening to it today.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. Yeah. That was awesome.
Yeah. No, it's fun. It's so fun to listen to these again. I mean, I enjoy doing them. And then afterwards I get to listen to them again because I do the show notes and everything. And then listening to them a final time to kind of put them to bed is kind of great, I don't know. At some point, we'll probably end this podcast someday. Maybe we'll go back and do them all, or find the threads that kind of bind all of these things together. I mean, there's such a disparate set of voices that we've had over the years, which is itself very humbling. But it is a joy to do. It's a joy to get to talk to other developers. It's one of the best parts of doing this, because I can talk to you anytime.
Yeah, that's true. And you do, and we do.
So, well, that is it. That's our end of year special. There will be clips throughout, so I have no idea how long this is going to be. Probably not that long, to be honest. I don't know that we know what we're playing next. We haven't really talked about it. I think we kicked around some ideas late last year.
We have a list floating around that we'll return to, but we haven't selected it yet. So we do need to get on that.
Yep,
ASAP.
So. In the meantime, you can send reviews or email to devgameclub@gmail.com, or whatever review platform you use for those. I see the ones that are in Apple, but other ones you might have to point us at. We love to read them on the air, so please do if you do. You can also find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub. You can find my co-host twitching. I hear every week this year at
At Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
That's right, on twitch.tv. We also have a Discord, fan Discord, run by the fans. Good fun. It's a good group there. You should go check them out. They're talking about a million things all the time. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, our merch store, and of course that Discord are by Mark Garcia. Thanks for all you do, Mark. Have fun counting down until you break your resolution this week, and good night.
Good night.